Hello everybody, good evening, and welcome to The Long and the Short of It, Rangers After Dark, at Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters, National Historic Site. My name is Ranger Meaghan, and I'm here at my house to get to talk about some of the things we normally don't ever get to talk about. The main point of what this program is there are so many things that we can't fit on our tours. There are so many new discoveries that we make every day in our research. There's a lot of niche and fun and weird and, sometimes grown-up things that we just can't talk about on a daily house tour. And this program is basically designed to talk about all of the fun things that we're studying in a much less formal sort of way. I thought it would be fun to kick off this new series with a focus on one of my favorite members of the Longfellow family, Henry Longfellow's son, Charley, by recapping and counting down the top 5 ways that Charley Longfellow almost died. And I feel like it's important to stress that I had to narrow this list down. There are so many near-death experiences with this guy that the fact that I needed to make a top 5 list kind of sums up a lot of his personality. Charley Longfellow traveled the world. He visited over 40 countries. And this was really an era where if you had enough money, you could go on all sorts of wild adventures. Adventures that were dangerous and opulent and things that had never really been done by tourists before. And naturally, Charley was able to do that. So he got himself into a lot of trouble, both at home and abroad. And it's little surprise that things did not always go accordingly to plan. So with that in mind, let's get into it. Starting off at number 5 on our list, we have Charley nearly being crushed by his father. So when it comes to this one, I don't think I can sum it up any better than Henry Longfellow himself wrote, when he said that Charley was born at 1 o'clock today. And I came very near to sending him out of the world as soon as he had got cleverly into it. For leaning over the bed to kiss Fanny, I nearly put my elbow on his head, not seeing him there. Not even an hour old and his father almost took him out. And I kind of feel this set the trajectory for the rest of Charley's life. At number 4, I might be cheating a little, because this was something that happened to Charley twice. He was stoned by a mob. Twice. And honestly, he kind of deserved it at least one of those times. In 1869, Charley Longfellow was in Kashmir and attempting to cross back over the Himalayas, and found that nobody in the towns he was stopping in were willing to sell him or give him any supplies that he needed to make the trek. He had overstayed his welcome. He was supposed to have left much sooner than he did, and I think that was a form of punishment for him for breaking the rules. But a bit desperate, Charley responded to this by kidnapping half of a village. And he got his comeuppance a little while later when a group of men came down from the local area and began to literally stone Charley's party. Charley wrote that he got hit in the shoulder with a pretty big stone, but that was the worst of wear for him. The fight ended when a man ended up getting hit on the head with a stone and getting knocked unconscious, and that kind of put things to rest, and Charley and his party quickly kind of skedaddled out of there. But as I said, I think there was some justification for that one. The second incident in Charley Longfellow's life where he was nearly stoned to death was a few years later in China. Now, this incident, I can't say for sure if Charley provoked it or not. His journals are pretty vague on the cause. What I will say about it is, much like the Henry quote, I feel like Charley sums it up better than I possibly could. At sunset, had a walk on the bank, among grain fields, fine, fragrant air, crops nearly ripe, followed by people, called names, and stoned, ran. On being turned on, stole beans from field in revenge. Well, I think that this was more a case of misunderstanding than the first encounter. The fact that Charley was stoned twice in a period of less than 5 years, I don't even know where I'm going with that thought, to be honest. It's just wild. Bouncing off our previous story, our number 3 spot goes to the dangers of the Himalayas in general. The Himalayas are home to some of the largest and most dangerous mountains in the world, and Charley decided to climb them. To be fair, in his defense, he was going through the lower passes. He wasn't like trying to scale Mount Everest or anything. But it was still incredibly dangerous, especially considering that right as the adventure through the Himalayas began, he ended up badly injuring his leg. Bad enough that in the end, it forced him to come home because he just was having too much trouble and it wasn't healing up. You would think that that would be enough of a sign that he should have turned around and gone back to anywhere else at that point, but he decided to carry on. It helped that he had people who were carrying him for a lot of this trek, but that still didn't change the fact that he did have to walk certain parts of it himself, or the fact that people being paid to carry him over mountains might drop him occasionally or fall themselves. And that happened on numerous occasions. Charley writes about being dropped into puddles and his leg giving out as he's climbing, and probably the most terrifying incident of all, where he writes about how if it were not for a boulder, he would have been pitched to kingdom come. So Himalayas were not the safest thing, and he clearly had a lot of close calls. But it's not just the mountain climbing itself. It was fording icy, rapid-filled rivers where he constantly writes about people almost drowning and some of the livestock that they're bringing with them actually drowning. And it's stuff like that that just really made this expedition a dangerous one, and it was something that Charley wrote quite a bit about. It was a fun adventure for him, but even mountain climbing today comes with risks, and Charley was willing to take them. In second place comes the doomed expedition of the USS Jeannette. In 1879, Charley was offered the opportunity of a lifetime. His friend, James Gordon Bennett, was sponsoring an expedition to go to the North Pole, and Charley was so excited to join this expedition. Fun fact about Bennett, he was just as wild a figure as Charley was, and even got Charley, rumor has it, involved in a duel 2 years before this expedition. That's another story for another time. Charley, of course, accepted this. He was more than happy to go on this expedition, but when he went to get his physical exam, his doctor declared him unfit for duty due to lingering health issues. and Charley was not allowed to go on the expedition, which was honestly probably one of the best things that ever happened to him. In July of 1879, Captain DeLong and 32 other sailors cast off and began their expedition to the North Pole. 2 years into this journey, the ship hit a large, impenetrable area of ice, which completely breached the hull, and the men all had to abandon ship. They ended up splitting into 3 separate parties, and only one of those parties managed to find safety. The other 2 groups perished, which means that of the original 33 sailors, only 13 of them ever made it home. And were it not for our number 1 near-death experience, Charley would have been among them. The question then remains, why was Charley unfit to go on that expedition? And the answer is pretty simple: the Civil War. In 1863, Charley ran away from home at the age of 18 to enlist in the Union Army. And it kind of goes without saying that if I'm going to be talking about war stories, these are going to be the nearest misses of all, which is why it came in at my number 1 personal spot. The first really documented incident we have happened that summer when Charley contracted camp fever. Disease was the number 1 killer of soldiers in the Civil War, and there was no guarantee that Charley was going to make it. But fortunately for him, he recovered, and he was back in active duty that September. His luck would run out, though, not long after. In November of 1863, Charley and his regiment were engaged in a skirmish in New Hope Church, Virginia. Union troops came up against a far larger fighting force than they were expecting, and in the ensuing battle, Charley decided to scout ahead to learn more about the enemy's position. When he came to a clearing, a volley opened fire, and Charley went down. A bullet ripped through Charley's back and nicked his spine on the way out. Family members later wrote that the bullet also managed to nick his lungs as well, though it's hard to say for sure whether that aspect of the wound is true or not. What is true is that Charley missed being paralyzed by centimeters, and there is no guarantee that he would have survived even despite that. One of the worst wounds to get in the Civil War was chest wounds, because if they became infected, you can't amputate it. And so the biggest fear was making sure that Charley's wounds did not become infected, and by some miracle, it didn't. It was a long, arduous recovery. Charley spent months barely being able to move. He could not dress himself, and it was a very long and painful journey to get back to Washington and eventually home to Cambridge. In the end, he did recover, but with lingering health issues for the rest of his life, and certainly some complications further down the line, which is why, a decade over later, he wasn't allowed to go on the polar trip. It's probably safe to say that most of us have not had the types of adventures that Charley Longfellow had. But that doesn't mean we haven't had our own fair share of travel nightmares. Maybe not near-death experiences, but still, vacations are never easy. So whether it's a staycation at home or a fun trip around the world, what are your travel horror stories? Let us know in the comments below. Or if you have any more questions about Charley or any other stories you might want to hear about, let us know. We've got a lot of them and we're just getting started in sharing them. So, join us next week for another installment of Rangers After Dark. We'll see you then.